How's that? Sound okay? Okay. Ah, so I was going to say, coming out on a rainy night like tonight is not so easy unless you live right around the block. Don't you live in the neighborhood? Yeah, kind of. You live in the neighborhood? Yeah. Oh, not so bad. Those of you who are coming from a longer distance, I just came back from the Guanyin retreat at Redwood Vihara down at Santa Cruz Mountains. Um, I felt like I was surfing for some of the time. The water was so high and so strong. Um, People were hydroplaning all over the place on 880. And it's like rain or shine, people just go out and do what they do. So at 70 miles an hour. Anyways, on the other hand, I was thinking, well, where else would you be on a Friday night? Coming to a monastery, sitting meditation, listening to a sutra? Come on, that's not so bad. One could do worse. Reminds me of a poem by Robert Frost. He said when he was a kid, he used to go in the woods in winter and climb up the birch trees until he got to a certain point at the top. And then the birch would bend and gently let him down to the ground again. And then he'd go back and do it again. He'd climb to the top uh, and just let the birch, and one break, just bend it down. And he did this. And then the end of the poem was something like, and one could do worse than be a swinger of birches. And it was kind of a statement of a lifestyle where sometimes the simple things are the most enjoyable. And the more we crank it up, the less delight we get from it. Anyhow, that isn't a comment on the sutra at all, but the sutra is in a sense swinging on birches. You climb up and you get there, and then it's gently let you down, and then you go back up again. We're looking at page 25, 26. Yeah. And I'm just going to repeat, repeat a section. Because I thought about it a little more last week. So here we have, and I'll just do the English because we did the Chinese last week. It's a line, to the sorrowful he praises sympathetic joy. To the crooked-minded he praises renunciation. And then the last lines, in Chinese we do this, 如是四点修，见诸诸佛法. And then we go to the next line, 如先立基笃，二后造公事，世界亦复然，菩萨众行遍本. I wanted to just kind of clear up this line here. What we're dealing with in the text is a really kind of a beautiful passage, and it's very subtle. We can oversimplify this. And I think we risk, if we oversimplify it, missing the profundity of this Dharma when it says is Wuyo Dingfa in Chinese, Meo Dingfa. There's no fixed Dharma. The Dharma is not a fixed thing like absolute carved, written on stone as a law, but rather it's a flexible, responsive, therapeutic, liberated techniques, a series of teachings, and more importantly, spiritual exercises that go with it that have a corresponding shift in consciousness and life, actually, of the person that they're meant for. So it's not so much a code of ethics or a law or even a doctrine or even a piece of literature per se, but it's actually kind of a living therapeutic medicinal herb that we take. So when translating, to bring this across in translation is not always easy. But the passage tonight is basically saying, answering the question, why so many different teachings? Why isn't it just one teaching about wisdom and so forth? And the text was going on, Manjushri is asking these questions, and the Bodhisattva who's answering is saying, that's just because people are really different. Living beings are really different. when they say people, we're just doing one of the 10 realms here. This is not the limitation of the scope of the Dharma. This Dharma is meant to transverse all 10 realms of the continuum of existence, and particularly the 6 realms of the hells, animals, hungry ghosts, people, asuras, and devas. We're in the 6 for the most part. I don't know, some of you might be devas, you're a little bit of, some of you may be, not quite, but whatever. The 4 sagely paths of arhats, prateka Buddhas, bodhisattvas, and Buddhas themselves also have and listen to and bathe in Dharma, but it's very different according to their capacities. I was thinking tonight when I was up at the Redwood Vihara is actually in the Redwoods. And I'm from Wisconsin, and so this is a very different state for me. And even when I go to Maine, I'm in the mountains of Maine, but I go to the end of the point where the woods are, and there's this just expanse of the broad lake over to the horizon. You see the distant mountains. Redwood Vihara, I almost feel like I was on that capsule that just went up around the moon. Everything just tall redwoods in a deep, deep valley. And it's 8 o'clock or so before you see the sunrise on the distant mountain over here behind me in the east. It's just, even though it's rising at 5:30 or 6, I don't see it till 8. And it goes down really quickly on the distant mountain. And then there's this dark, and I look up at these redwoods and they're humongous. I'm just this little thing at the bottom of that. But when it rains, it's really, I go for a walk. I'm just digressing, I'm having fun tonight. I just watched a very interesting documentary called Fungi. And it talks about the mycelium. And I could actually see it and feel it when I was up at the forest this time. I was walking and I saw these little mushrooms and I thought, aha, I know these mushrooms are just the buds of an underneath fabric of interconnectivity of these mycelium, and I'm walking on top of this. But what I was noticing was a passage from the Platform Sutra and all the Lotus Sutra that says the Dharma is like a rain, and it falls universally everywhere on everything. It does not discriminate. However, it's received differently according to the capacities of the different species and animals. For example, the grasses absorb as much as it can and the rest flows out. A tiny insect may just take a little molecule or two and that's it, they're full. These great spacious trees can absorb an incredible amount and still not be full, and then the rest runs off. And I was just thinking, this is a perfect metaphor, if you will, for this passage here. The rain is universally, it has one flavor. This is a very interesting line. And the text in the Pali uses a word, the flavor vimutti rasa. Vimutti rasa has a single flavor. And vimutti rasa means literally the taste of liberation or the flavor of freedom. Rasa is flavor. I explained this once before because I just had a friend who's from India, and she was telling me, yeah, but rasa is not just flavor. I said, she said, no, rasa is almost and she was like trying to, it's like when you go to a Mozart concert mass and the whole church is filled with choir, music, sounds, the incense, the ceremonies, the rituals, the flowers, and so forth, and you bathe in an atmosphere that elevatus lifts you up. And so as a result, you're different of having been immersed in that. That's what rasa means. So rasa is not simply the taste or flavor like ketchup or mustard, but rasa is a transformative, elevating change in not just consciousness, but in all your sense organs. And as a result, you go out uplifted. It's spiritually uplifting. It makes you a different person. So this is said to be the flavor of Dharma, vimutti rasa, which is the flavor, that taste of freedom and liberation. So it has a single flavor, but nonetheless, all of us absorb it differently. In this room, all of us are picking up certain elements of this. Even as I'm talking, you might be reading the text and picking up another entry point, another idea from the imagery or from your own experience. And it's the same true of the different beings that are talked about. For example, if you have someone like Kshitagarbha or Store Bodhisattva who's made vows to teach and transform beings who are God in their various realms or destinies of the hells, it's a different dharma. It's completely a different dharma that's being taught there. Talking to the devas, the gods, it's very different than talking to those in the hells. And you mix them up and they don't connect. They don't connect. I would even say at a deep level, they're not even heard. So if something's not appropriate for you, if it's not going to register, it's not going in. It's just like the water will go off and you can't absorb it. You were there, the sound was in the air, or the text was on the page, but you didn't see it, you didn't hear it. And this is an expression from the Nirvana Sutra. They had eyes, but they could not see. They had ears, but they could not hear this teaching. So in any event, Manjushri is asking about this, and this phrase we got to, the crooked-minded. This is, and I mentioned this earlier, the crooked-minded is basically a, how should we translate it? I'll go back to look at what, devious, not honest, not frank and straightforward, not transparent, kind of agenda-driven, like when you meet someone who's that way, you're never quite sure what they're coming at you with. There's some agenda behind. Oh, it's so nice to see you. You really? You know, I'm glad you came. I'm sorry for your loss, when actually you're not. But the words themselves can disguise a crooked mind, so it's talking about something like that. And then the reason I wrestled with this, it's called Chushin is the devious mind that's used. And then the text says, and that's one we read tonight, he praises, to those who have that crooked mind, praises renunciation. And that's the Shu. And if you look at the character on the page, you'll see the first line, Yo Chi Wan Zanshi, and then the Chushin, crooked-minded, Zantan praises Shu, that character on the bottom. And I was a little bit wondering about that, and I tried to work with it last week because that's the character that's used for one of the four unlimited minds, one of the Brahma Viharas. There's, anybody know what they are? The four Brahma Viharas? Oh, here we go. Huh? The one I want for tonight, yeah. Upeksha. Now, sometimes they say upeka, but it's upeksha. And in Chinese, it's sibei shisha, kindness, compassion, karuna, mudita, sympathetic joy. It doesn't mean that you're high, or you're excited, or you're joyous. It means you delight in the joy that others experience. You actually have this heart that when you see others happy, you feel happy. You see others miserable, you feel miserable. It's the opposite of, say, schadenfreude. You know that term, schadenfreude? Schadenfreude is a term that means you take delight in other people's misery. They're not, oh, I'm glad they got it, that kind of thing. So what I was working with here, this is not Shu of the Sibei Shisha. It's not the Vihara, the four Brahma Viharas. And that was, I had to look it up because that usually translates as equanimity, even-mindedness. But here, when it's saying the crooked, he speaks Shu, it actually is the other meaning of it. And the other meaning basically is discard, throw away, stop it. I mean, literally, you stop that stuff. Reject it, let it go, give it up. And so basically what it's saying here, to someone who has that kind of mind, it's almost like you throw cold water on it and say, stop that. Get true, speak true, be true. Stop beating around the bush and trying to manipulate things. It may not work, but at least you've called it out and you're not playing into it. So when you look at the Shu of the four Brahma Viharas, and I think it's very interesting, the Chinese is Yo Bi Shu. Yo Bi Shu. That's the original Chinese for Shu of the fourth unlimited mind. And if you hear it, Yo Bi Shu, Upeksha, Yobisha, Upeksha. Oh my gosh, it's transliteration. So when the Chinese heard certain terms, either coming from Sanskrit or Central Asia, if they had equivalents, they would translate it. If they didn't have equivalents, they often transliterated it. So, for example, in China at that time, there wasn't any Buddha, and there wasn't any concept of Buddha. The Sanskrit, interestingly enough, is actually 3 syllables, but it's very subtle. It's Buddhaya, 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 yeah. And the Chinese did Fotoya, and later got changed to Fu, because they, I guess, like reduction. And then you had Sanskrit wars, they didn't have a concept. They had Shengren, a sagely person, but they didn't have Bodhisattva, which is Sanskrit. So what did they do? Putisatto. Putisatto, which then became Pusa. And so when the Chinese say Pusa, it's actually an abbreviated transliteration of Bodhisattva, Pusa. So I'm guessing maybe scholars online, if there's any awake on a Friday night doing this with me, probably not. My scholarship is miserly, but I think what I hear here is that Yobisha is actually Upeksha transliterated. So literally, and then it became Sure. And it's interesting, it also is associated with Pingdong. Pingdong meaning level and equal, equality. And so when one of the texts say they entered the samadhi of Pingdong Shin, the level equality of all phenomena. So this is a meditation state, you could say, but it's also a state of being and seeing that is a result of contemplating, meditating things as they really are. So when you say Pingdong Shin, the level equality of all dharmas, you see all phenomena of as a piece. And it's like the Vajra Sutra. Yes, they're there. Yes, I respond to them, but ultimately they're like dreams, illusions, bubbles, shadows. There's no self-nature to any of these. They're all interrelated, inconditioned, arising phenomena. So this allows even for the Bodhisattva to see all living beings as a one and same substance, as not differentiating rich and poor, male, female, anything like that, but to see them in their natural state as living beings who are potentially fully awakened beings. And the only difference is that in conditioned state they're in now is not the same. So the Pingdong Shin is basically then at the heart of compassion. Being one with everyone, seeing the level sameness. Now, this this obviously breaks down race and ethnicity and ethnocentrism and even nationalism and ultranationalism and all those things, all the isms that we have that break and fragment that lead to better, worse, higher, lower, pure, impure designations we give, all these fall away with the Pingdong Shin, the level even mind. So you can see how this is a mind that occurs seeing things as they really are in meditation. It's not a contemplation that you take on and you try to internalize. That's a different kind of contemplative practice. You're not internalizing an outside idea or image. What you're doing is letting the mind rest, and in that resting stage, without attachment or grasping, it naturally sees things as they are, and that's where the Pingdong Shin comes from, that mind. So it means basically abandoning bias clinging. The other word that's used in the Nirvana Sutra, interesting, they call it upeksha, is equality. And then they use it in a sequence. So you have, this goes into something you might know or familiar with vipassana, shamatha vipassana meditation, or sometimes called stopping and contemplating, or stillness and insight, however you render it. But all these terms are coming around from the same ground that's related to what I'm talking about here. So in the Nirvana Sutra, it talks about regarding, which is guan, stopping, which is the jur. So you stop to contemplate, observe, which is also the guan. And then the fourth one associated with it is equanimity. So you stop your busyness, you stop the mad mind, you observe things as they really are. And from this observation, as you see things, then the equanimity comes as a result of that. So it's just really interesting. And the stopping, it doesn't literally mean like you stop in an artificial stillness where you're numb or you've entered a trance-like state, but it means you just stop the mind from running out and grabbing at everything. You let it be in its natural stillness and purity and don't move with external circumstances as they come. You observe them, but you're not attached to them. And that's what the stopping means. So it's wrong to think of this as someone sitting in a cave with blank walls and they've stopped up the sensory organs, they stopped up their vital energies, and they're simply entering a state of zoned out, detachment. What it means is you stop the mind from running all over the place. It means it's actually more aware than it would be because it's not attaching to any one thing. Because of not attaching to one thing, it's universally gathering in. And sometimes this is called like a mirror that's able to reflect the myriad phenomena. Anyhow, I just wanted to go a little bit on that. And maybe this isn't key to your understanding or what you find interesting in the text, but it does require, when we started translating this stuff back in the 60s and 70s, we actually did kindness, compassion, joy. We didn't even understand it as sympathetic joy. We just thought joy. And then one of the nuns wrote a song, Great is the Joy, and it was like, I'm really happy, okay? And then the last one, we translate as renunciation. So kindness, compassion, joy, and renunciation from the Sure, not knowing that that was abbreviated transliteration of equanimity. So it never made sense to me even back then. Well, kindness, compassion, joy, and renunciation. I couldn't figure out what is that? How is that a boundless heart? Anyhow, it's actually equanimity. Okay. Yes. You'll have to ask it loudly because I have bad ears.
It's in page 24.
Mm-hmm. Page 24. Mm-hmm. Where are we now? Page 24. Yeah, that's an interesting, I didn't notice that translation either. And you see it's also Shisha, right? Sube Shisha. Why somebody that's not my translation, but I'm glad you spotted that because I don't think that's a good translation. Giving is usually dana. It's one of the paramitas. So here, now maybe, since this might have been an early translation, let's just do a little investigation. If renunciation is the original then giving is a form of renunciation. So somebody might say, well, it doesn't make sense to do renunciation here. I'm going to translate it as renouncing and giving. So good you spotted that. But you can see how various things come off of just a very kind of simple misunderstanding of the original terms. Okay. Thank you. Very alert. Where are we? Oh, the time wishes on. Okay. So the one I wanted to point out to you in terms of language tonight was basically 1, 2, 3, 4 phrases that have been showing up in this passage, but also is accordingly, Rusher, accordingly. Then you have appropriately, and then you have successively. And then in this last line here that we did tonight, gradually perfecting. So you have all ing activities. It's not about just accordance or appropriate or successive and perfection, but it's gradually moving, dynamic. And so this is a very interesting idea that the middle way then that's talked about in these texts is not a fixed and like a compass point, but rather it's an adjustment point of balance. So the middle way is something that is between all kinds of variables and possibilities, but it's to stay centered and balanced in the midst of things. It's very similar to the character Jung, like in the Jungyong, the balancing, unswerving pivot that's sometimes called. And it's also close to the character Jung. And Jung is basically a picture of a carpenter square. So it's basically communicating the idea of situated in the center, standard. It means to rectify, but to rectify in the sense of when I was working with my grandfather, who was a carpenter, he would set up his things. He had the measure twice, cut once. That was one of his expressions, which you, or measure 3 times and cut once, because once you cut, it's done. But so you want to make sure your measurement's correct. So he'd use his measure, but he would have something up, and then he would put a, what is that called? The balancing, a level, right? I really liked it because it was green, fluid on the inside, and there was a bubble, and the bubble go this way or that way. That was really cool. And of course, he thought I wasn't learning anything. Like, oh, this is cool, great. No, you put it here, and he would then rectify. Rectify what he meant to bring it into balance. Or if it was on the side, you could rectify it this way. So when we think of rectify, we sometimes think about it as a moralistic rectitude. But really what's calling here is basically to align, to stay in balance. And so the character Jung, which is used, I mean, we could go night after night on this character because it's in the Confucian classics quite a bit. In the Da Shui, in the Lunyu, you find this character used again and again and again. And sometimes, for example, in the Da Shui, it says, it gives this formula where somebody really wants to make the world. Let me read you the passage here. I'm not so sure I like this translation, but somebody just gave it to me. And I'm not going to bore you tonight with translation stuff. But here it says, wishing to establish an orderly rule in their kingdoms, they first put their royal houses into proper balance. And then wishing to put their families in proper balance, they first had to cultivate their own moral character as individuals. And then wishing to cultivate their own character as individuals, they had to first set straight, here you go, balance, set straight, put in order, the seat of their emotional and cognitive faculties. And wishing to set these faculties straight, they had to first achieve a state of integral wholeness in the inner depths of their consciousness. And then goes on, it says, and wishing to achieve that state of wholeness in their innermost consciousness, they first had to expand the utmost their range of comprehension. And it goes on, and basically it says, and then attend to things in the smallest of places as a text. What this is referring to is in the deepest stirrings of their hearts and emotions and their identities, right there to make sure everything is aligned. It's not off. And then once that's aligned, it says, wishing to cultivate the person, they first jung their hearts, their minds. So the jung is they squared, they centered their hearts and minds. It's an inner cultivation of making sure that you are actually true. You're an actual true person. Now this is something but true, what's the measuring thing? The texts say you already have the measuring compass inside of you. It's not external. It's not external. Even a good and wise advisor can somehow mirror that for you, but that's not the same thing as you balancing it yourself. And if they mirror it for you, you cannot rely on their mirroring. You have to find your own mirror, your own compass. In the wonderful passage, I like the Mango Stone Sutta, the Buddha tells his son Ananda at the time, he says, your compass is like an elephant's trunk. Super sensitive, don't lose it. That's what you steer by. You don't have to listen to me, you haven't listened to society or whatnot. You have to tune into that. And you have it whole and complete at 7 years old. The question would be, do we lose it at 70? And how do we lose it? But the presumption is that you have everything, this is very basic to this philosophy. You have everything whole and complete, all you need. You have this inherent potential to have wisdom and compassion to the utmost degree. Then you have to listen to it, you have to cultivate it, you have to still and observe and watch. And he says, rectify the heart. Once the heart is rectified, it goes out then. Your heart's rectified, then your relationship with others are going to be okay. Your relationship with others being okay, then the country and the society will be okay. And the country and society be okay, gradually you'll have peace and harmony throughout the world. So you get the macro, micro thing here, but if you want to, it says if you want to change the world, you have to go to the smallest of places. And then the passage, the text ends, it says, from the emperor, the king, or whoever, down to the most common person, Shoshan Weiban. Cultivating one's own person is the heart of everything else. Once you do that, everything. So this thing I'm going into is this, it's referring to this inner sensitivity and not an outer conformity to the status quo or conventional. Now this has been misrendered. I'm sorry, I'm going to editorialize a little bit, but some cultures take these teachings, which are meant to be self-transformative, liberating techniques, and they turn them into dogmas and doctrines that are used for social control or conformity. And they say, well, we're teaching this text or this religion, when in fact what they're doing is teaching the shell of it at the best, and not the kernel, not the heart. So I'm not going to go too far down this road tonight. I don't want to step on toes, and maybe that's why we wear those hard shoes, with steel toes, so nobody can step on our toes. Anyhow, this is something that said, children have it, but they can lose it. Person born is close to the way, but over time, and with bad companions, and not checking their inner thoughts, they depart, they diverge. So these are from the classics. I'm just quoting you these texts. So that being the case, it's extremely important to see what this practice of meditation is. And the next line is going to be, I won't get to it tonight, but you say, in order, as one must first set a foundation in order to build a palace, or a hut, or a kuti. So too, giving and precepts are the basic for all bodhisattva practice. So what it's going back to here, it's saying, if you want to stay in touch with this, if you want to cultivate it, then you have to begin with moral grounding, moral centering, ethical awareness, ethical sensibility. And again, it's like, well, what are ethics? Kant says, no. What the text is saying here is you intrinsically know. Now you may step away from that, you may deny it, you may second guess it, you may rationalize it or whatnot, but the capacity of conscience to know is innate. Now how you work with it turns out to be why we're all different. Nonetheless, I'm thinking E. Cummings, children know this, but only a few, and down they forget as up they grew. This kind of expression he gives to the loss of that. And Confucius says it happens for two reasons. One is bad companionship. He puts it very simple. And the second is you do not watch over your interior world, your interior thoughts and feelings. So this becomes, I was just going to quote this wonderful line here, if I can find it. Yeah, and this is from a similar text. This is from the Jongyong. And the Jongyong is basically, some people call it living in centeredness, being centered in everything you do. The Jung is use, active. Jung is the centering. This is a line from there which really gives you its flavor, because the flavor that it's giving, I'm trying to stress right now just for the sake of maybe an east-west dichotomy. There is a tendency in the larger pattern sometimes of Western thoughts to have codes and conduct and to have laws and a more of an orthodoxy, rightness by the text, the creed, the tradition, and then there's this thing which is orthopraxy. It's right by its practice, by its engaged living method. And that's how you judge the rightness. So here in this text from the Jongyong, he talks about this unswerving pivot, this centering mechanism that you have. It's almost like a gyroscope. And as much as I understand gyroscopes, I know they use them in rockets, so the rocket stays balanced amidst all the turning and whatnot. It always comes back to center. So the unswerving pivot is talking about this moral, virtuous, clear-minded heart that's at the center of our rocket life, if you will. And then the text here I'm going to read you says, the person that cultivates in this way, the real person, the alive person, it's junza, but junza means exemplary. It means you're really a person. You're really a person. You're not. You can read something. Carl Rogers has a great book on becoming a person, and it talks about humanistic psychology in the terms of personhood as something that we work on and we perfect, but it's being true to yourself and thus very much true to others and so on and so forth. Anyhow, this person does not wait until he or she sees things to be cautious, nor to hear things to be apprehensive. There's nothing more visible than that which is hidden or secret. And there's nothing more manifest than that which is minute. And therefore, this person is watchful over him or herself even when he or she is alone. So this is a fabric of what it's talking about. So it's not about how others see you. It's not about your social self or how you look, or when you apologize, you say, I am really sorry for what I did here, as opposed to, I'm sorry you felt bad. I'm sorry you felt offended by my actions. That's not the sincere person. So the thought that came to mind for me tonight was in our sort of American experience, you can see this kind of thinking in some of our earliest writers like Emerson and Thoreau. It should be thorough. I always say Thoreau, now I learned that's a wrong pronunciation. It's thorough. It's on the thur. Anyhow, Emerson was sort of his mentor. They were both at Harvard. But Thoreau, as people say, marched to the beat of a different drummer. He didn't go the socially acceptable route, even though he could have. And he ended up in jail once, and Emerson went to visit him, embarrassed and willing to pay to get him out of jail because he was his student and he was a Harvard graduate, and what's he doing in jail? And he said, Henry, his name was Henry David Thoreau, what are you doing here? And Thoreau replied, Waldo, the question is, what are you doing out there? And so what this is referring to is Emerson missed the point of Thoreau's being in jail. It wasn't because he was derelict or he did something bad. It was an act of conscience. It was a pure act of conscience. And Thoreau was basically saying, if we don't act on the discernment that we have of what's right or wrong, we'll eventually lose that capacity to make the distinction. So this is very much in keeping with these texts that we're reading here. What he was in jail for, he refused to pay a poll tax that was done money for the Mexican-American War because he thought the war was immoral and he wasn't going to have his money going for that war. So because he didn't pay the poll tax, he was put in jail. Later, Martin Luther King, inspired by this, had a similar thing from his letter from Birmingham jail. I don't know if any of you know his famous letter from a Birmingham jail. But basically, he was saying he was going along with something close to Aristotle. A law that's not moral is not a law. This is Aristotle's. And this was the laws of discrimination, which I experienced firsthand when I was in the South. Segregation to the point of schools, churches, even water fountains, this whole thing. And he said, this is not moral. This is not how you treat human beings. And for that, he was in jail. And he said, in a society where things are immoral and the laws are immoral, the only place for a moral person to be is in jail. So this became the basis of his justification. He wasn't saying be lawless, be an anarchist. He was simply saying you have to listen to a higher moral law that may not be the law of the land. So, geez, I was going to do asceticism tonight. I don't know if I'm going to get to it. Well, maybe we'll just start it. Well, maybe I'll just do one little personal story tonight. Next week, we could do asceticism. Siempre mañana. So when I was expressing this sort of cardinal rule of the cultivation according to these wisdom traditions, and even going to the Confucian thing, is the pay attention to who you're hanging out with, and also pay attention to what your thoughts and your feelings, our emotions are. So the meditation is a self-reflective thing. It's not to stop the mind, but it's really to watch the rising and falling of all these thoughts and feelings, and therefore taking responsibility for it. And often this technique of self-cultivation is not easy, and it's not necessarily pleasant, because a lot of things come up, and our impulses, our habits, that are in fact not wholesome. And it's really hard to face that. Sometimes it's easier to face alone than in a group if somebody points it out. And if somebody points it out, you have to be careful that when you point it out, that you're on good ground to point out. Don't be in glass houses and throw stones, kind of thing. Nonetheless, what I was thinking of in regards to this was some time ago, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, we were at a gathering of, they called us Dharma teachers. Anyhow, and it was with the Dalai Lama, and we were having these breakouts. You meet in smaller groups, right? Outbreaks is for something else. We were having breakouts, and in one of the breakouts, a bunch of Dharma teachers got in there talking about what they teach and their ideas of prajnaparamita and wisdom and vipassana and chan and so on and so forth. And there was an elder monk there. At the time, I didn't know who he was, but later I found out he was Gosananda, actually from Cambodia. And the reason I remember, he always wore two hats. So there we were outside, and he'd have one hat on, and then he'd have another hat on top of that, like, woolly hats. Not like your hat, but the hat that you just pull down, and you have two. And he's always just smiling and walking around. So he was in this breakout group, and I noticed him because obviously he was very noticeable. He had a quality of light and virtue about him, but everybody was sharing their opinion, and finally everybody thought, gee, he's been sitting there really quietly. And everybody felt pretty much taken with they were Dharma teachers, so they were sharing their Dharma teaching. Well, when I teach, and finally someone said, well, maybe we should be polite and ask him. He's kind of an Asian guy, maybe he doesn't speak English, It's like, but we can't not exclude him because we're liberal progressive Dharma teachers, right? So they say, Venerable, what do you think? What do you have to say? And he says, be careful what you eat. And everything went, huh? Okay, so he's on some kind of dietary blah, blah, blah. And finally we're going to move on. Somebody said, could you maybe explain that a little? And he says, we become what we eat. I said, okay, that was cool in California. And he says, the eyes eat, the ears eat, the nose and the mouth and the tongue eat, and the mind eats. And each of these things we eat, we become. So be careful what you look at, what you listen to, what you take in. And be careful what you're eating with your mind, because you become what you, there is mind ground prajnaparamita teaching in a nutshell from this. And it was very pragmatic, very practical, because in fact, not only do we become what our friends are, Our friends are basically sight, sound, smells, tastes, and objects of touch, and dharmas, internal things. These are the things that become our dharma realm, become our body, become our walking country. So you find this metaphor throughout these texts, even in the Platform Sutra. The patriarch says, you want to go to the Pure Land? Oh yeah, we want to go in a split second. He says, I'll show you how to get there. And he says, your own body is a Pure Land. The eyes, the ears, nose, tongue, body are the gates, the doors, and so forth, and what you let in, don't. And it goes through this whole beautiful analogy. Don't look outside, don't look far away, don't wait till you die. It's on the ground right under your feet. It's within your own body person. Cultivate that, and you'll be in the Pure Land. Neglect that, no Pure Land wouldn't make sense to you. You wouldn't even recognize the Pure Land because you can't. Your eyes are so twisted, your ears, and so on and so forth. So this is a really sort of story that I remember from him. Interestingly, he was known as the Gandhi of Cambodia. So I didn't know him at the time, but when the Pol Pot, you know about Pol Pot, collapsed in '79, he was only one of 3,000 Cambodian Buddhist monks alive then. More than 60,000 had been wiped out in the terror of '76. And he established these refugee camps along the Thai-Cambodian border, and then organizing and ordaining monks and nuns against the Thai military's instructions, much less the Cambodian. He built 30 temples, and then with a 16-day walk in 1992, 120 miles of peace walk, he walked through territory basically littered with landmines from the Khmer Rouge. And he made it through. And that walk consisted of 350 monks and nuns and lay Buddhists who escorted through this walk to their villages back in Cambodia. So his name, Maha, means great. Goshanana means joyful proclaimer. And he was well known for his peace marches. So I just thought I'd share that story with you tonight because, again, it's very easy to totally abstract this material and not know that it's really talking about something that's very, very straightforward about being a real person, being true, guarding your mind and your sense organs, being careful what you eat, and so forth. So bounced off to the crooked mind, and he speaks of stop that. And almost like you could be sitting here in meditation, you say, all of a sudden this thought comes up, and you know you don't want to go down that road. Stop it. It's almost like a good and wise advisor, and stop that. You've been doing this before, you know it doesn't work. Why do you keep doing this? Stop it. And that's sure. And from that stopping it, maybe equanimity then can arise. But if you don't stop, it just keeps going and going. Anyhow, next week, maybe, we talk a little more about asceticism because it came up with earlier passage in last week, but too much is the same as too little. So we'll stop here. Any further questions? Thank you for pointing that out in the text. You spotted that. And I would say this generally, all of our translations are a work in progress. Translations and art, and by definition, art is something that's always getting better but never perfected. And this is something we're constantly working on here too. So if you see something in the translation, either you know the original language and you don't think it's a good translation, bring it up. Or you don't know the original language, but it goes thunk or thud when you read it in English, bring it up. Because that thunk or thud could be a sign that the translation is not good. So there's both a kind of more scholarly, academic, linguistic side you can bring to it, but there's also the real heart side of saying, if this is supposed to be equanimity, why is it translated as giving? Doesn't make sense here in this passage. And even if you use renunciation to call, they say, oh, the Buddha was with, he was at the Jedi Grove with 150 renunciants and so forth. And you go, huh, Really? Is that a good renunciance? Because again, what that conveys is sort of mortification. Those who have given up joys and pleasures of life, who renounced. And we have a negative association with that. And in fact, if you go back to the Vimutti Rasa, the liberated, he was with the liberated. And then Shramana, is referring to those who were cultivating that direct encounter with the spiritual. They didn't see themselves as renunciating. The society's judgment of them that they were renunciants. Oh, you poor soul, you've given up everything. You know, you're just eating vegetarian food, you don't go to the movies anymore, you're not driving a fancy car, and your closet's pretty thin, you've renounced so much, I feel sorry for you. That person going, I feel sorry for you. I am happy. And the example I gave even was if somebody is walking along in chains and you take the chains off, you don't say they renounced their chains. You say they were set free. The same way, to translate these spiritual cultivators as renunciants or as ascetics really misses the point of the joy that's actually coming from their hearts. So anyhow, that's what I mean. It goes thunk. You kind of get into that mindset about it and then you miss it. So we'll stop here for tonight. No questions? Good. The retreat is still going on at Redwood Vihar. There's about 30 some people up there doing the Guanyin session. I was up there since Tuesday, came back today. Really good energy. Really good energy. There's nothing better than people deep in the redwoods and they have voluntary vow of silence. You know what else they did? On the first day, they renounced, or they were liberated. They took their cell phones and put them in a bag, and Jin Chuan's holding it in his little cootie. So they basically cut off all their cell phone internet thing for a whole week. And when I went up there, I saw them on the first day they did it, and basically they looked like they were in DTs. Everybody know DTs? Delirium tremens, withdrawal from alcohol, right? My phone, where's my phone? Oh. And then, was that a tree? Oh, a tree, a bird. Oh, and all of a sudden they were observing, instead of this. By the day I left, I'm saying this, I hope they don't hear it. They went from looking sort of down and had something vital taken away from them, just full of light. Some of the people I know, less wrinkles. I mean, their faces just were clear and they were buoyant and full. They didn't know it. That's why I say they didn't know it, because they weren't trying to get there. It was just, and I was joking with Doug, I said, or Jin Chuan, I was saying, gosh, the Dharma's really wonderful and you don't even have to master anything. It's just not do anything. And the Dharma speaks itself. It's like, wait a minute, they don't even know, they're coming over this retreat, and just by doing nothing, dropping the cell phone, this natural fullness sort of comes back it's like, it's just so wonderful to see. And no Dharma was spoken, nothing was given. It was just very cost-free. Just stop. So when you say stopping, it doesn't mean renunciation. It means stop bleeding, stop the outflowing. And anyhow, enough. We'll transfer in English, and then I'll let you, sounds like the rain has paused. Or my ears are getting worse than ever. If you don't know the English, I guess we have some cards. Does everybody know the English? Mostly familiar? Okay. They're in the back someplace, little cards with the words on it if you want to follow along. Yeah. Anybody else need a card? Okay. Oh, it's on the last page. Okay. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the triple jewel.